Good morning. Welcome to Morning Meditation. Great to have you with us. I'm doing Mass tonight at Grasshopper Chapel, which is down on Highway 23, just north of Cold Spring. And I'm looking for a photo that I had just thought of looking for, and that is a photo of the twisted trees out there. But we have a picture of the chapel, right? Okay. So, a little history, or a lot of history for those who don't know very much about it. And so this isn't very far away from this is like 15 miles tops. Assumption Chapel, also known as the Grasshopper Chapel, is a Roman Catholic church. We wouldn't necessarily call it a church, it's not a parish. We would call it a chapel, situated on the outskirts of Cold Spring, Minnesota. It was constructed in 1877. Well, the first building was constructed in 1877. In petition for relief from the grasshopper plagues that devastated Midwest farmland between 1873 and 1877. All right. The plagues. This is Wikipedia. Actually, I think this article is really quite good. The first chapel built on the site was known as Maria Hilf, which means Mary's help in German. At the time of its original construction in 1877, much of the Midwest was suffering from locust plagues. The plagues began in the summer of 1873 when Rocky Mountain locusts laid claim to a territory spreading from southern Wyoming over Nebraska and the Dakotas all the way to Iowa and Minnesota. The first year the grasshoppers came looking for food and found it plentifully in the wheat fields where they laid eggs. The newly hatched grasshoppers were wingless for the first 6 to 8 weeks of life, but their work was no less devastating. Until they could fly, they crawled along and feasted on the tender new growth of crops. When their wings grew strong enough, they flew off to another field. This cycle would continue from 1873 to 1877, bringing widespread destruction to a part of the country primarily dependent on an agricultural economy. Large black clouds made up of thousands of grasshoppers moved from field to field and from county to county. This is from a book called The Harvest of Grease by the Minnesota Historical Society, so that's one of the major citations of this article. One historian reported that grasshoppers, 60 to 80 per square yard, could devour 1 ton of hay per day, each 40 acres that they covered. And that's by Robert Voigt, The Story of Mary and the Grasshoppers. The grasshoppers ate everything and anything: crops, fruit trees, wooden fork handles, even clothing. In her book, On the Banks of Plum Creek, Laura Wilder records her eyewitness account of the plight of these plagues. She relates how they could not even keep grasshoppers out of the milk pail while milking. She tells how some men headed to the eastern side of the state to find work on unaffected farms. The farmers who stayed to fight the plague resorted to desperate measures. Some used smudge pots to keep the grasshoppers in flight. Others set their doomed crops on fire in order to kill the fledgling grasshoppers. Many farmers resorted to catching them by hand or in buckets. People started building hopper dozers. These machines consisted of pieces of sheet metal smeared with tar, which would be dragged over infested fields. The grasshoppers would get stuck in the tar and be wiped off and burnt at each end of the field. However, the grasshoppers devastated the crops at a speed that no human invention could compete with. The number of grasshoppers and the destruction they brought with them grew each year. By the spring of 1877, grasshopper eggs covered approximately 2/3 of Minnesota. Each year, the Minnesota state legislature appropriated more and more funds to assist its distressed citizen with the purchase of seed and even the necessity of food and clothing. People began to lose their faith in man-made inventions. They turned to spiritual means to relieve the devastation caused by the plague. Minnesota Governor John S. Pillsbury declared April 26, 1877, a statewide day of prayer. The night and the following day, the weather shifted and the rain which fell turned to snow. The people thought that this could be the event to impede the grasshopper destructive advances. When the storm passed, they were as plentiful as ever. In Stearns County, about a month after the statewide day of prayer, newly ordained Father Leo Winter, Benedictine, was assigned to the parish of St. James in Jacob Prairie with the mission of St. Nicholas some 8 miles away. In the midst of the plague, Father Winter encouraged the people to continue their prayer of supplication. Father Winter felt that they should petition the Virgin Mary to intercede for them to God for relief from the grasshoppers. Father Winter talked over the idea with fellow parishioners. They decided to build a chapel in Mary's honor and offer masses of thanksgiving every Saturday. The parishioners of the two parishes agreed. They would build a chapel to honor the Mother of God, to take refuge in her as their intercessor, and be freed from the ravages of the grasshopper plague. Two farmers donated 7 acres between the two parishes of St. James and St. Nicholas. Construction on the chapel began July 16, 1877. Laura Ingalls Wilder recorded the grasshoppers left suddenly that month, July of 1877. All told, the chapel cost a total of $865, was completed in less than a month. The day after completion, August 15th, Father Winter consecrated the altar and celebrated the first Mass. According to a document signed and notarized with 6 witnesses, by the time the second Mass was offered on September 8th, 1877, no grasshoppers remained. There has not been a grasshopper plague in Minnesota or the Midwest since 1877. The Masses on Maria's Hill, or Maria Hilf, continued as promised. And the farmers began to harvest successful crops the next year. The original chapel was destroyed by June 28, 1894 by a tornado. The wooden chapel was picked up and smashed into a grove of trees. The destruction was complete except for a statue of the Virgin Mary which stood unharmed in the rubble. The hill would stand vacant for 58 years. In 1952, in honor of the centennial of the Diocese of St. Cloud, the chapel was rebuilt. The current chapel stands 16 by 26 feet, the approximate size of the original building. It was constructed of rough granite, much of which was donated by the Cold Spring Granite Company. The inside of the chapel is simple, has no pews, only an altar. The chapel walls are made of polished agate and carnelian granite. The chapel features 4 stained glass windows. Above the altar stands the wooden statue that had been carried in procession through the Cold Spring community at the time of the chapel's original consecration. And so that is the chapel that survived the tornado. The stone carving above the door is inscribed, Assumpta est Maria. Mary is assumed, or Mary has been taken up, referring to the new name given to this reconstructed chapel. Mary is pictured, and at her feet, bowing in submission, are 2 grasshoppers. The new chapel was dedicated October 7th, 1952. Today, in continuation of the chapel's tradition of petitioning for good harvest, there is an annual August 15th Mass celebrated on the hill. Also, since 1990, for 9 consecutive weeks in May and June, Mass is celebrated on Thursday evenings. A novena for the intention of safe planting season and a good harvest. The surrounding parishes, including ones in St. Cloud, take turns celebrating the Mass. So tonight it is our turn, at least in my 3 parishes, and We've got our music people going out there. We've got readers going out there. It's going to be an exciting night out there, actually. 7:30 Mass, 7 o'clock, 7 o'clock Rosary. Joy says she's going out there. And so bring your chair tonight. There is one other feature that isn't mentioned in this article. In the 50s, I believe, a heavy wind came up there again. And there are 2 trees that are grown like this. They got basically blown over in the wind. They got blown straight, and then they started to grow back up. And so really, it's quite a sight. The chapel is really neat. And of course, our weather forecast for today is beautiful. And so we're excited about that. You might want to think about bug spray because it's a lot of trees up there. It can get kind of buggy. And bring a chair. There's plenty of room. You park down below, and then you can walk up the hill. But if you need handicap accessibility, you can drive up the hill. But for those with the ability to walk, it's a little bit of a pilgrimage to go up the hill. Kind of a cool little thing. And so we'll go up there. Rosary at 7 o'clock. Mass at 7:30. And we'll see if I have something reasonably good to say. But we actually got on the list. I got on the list for the priest to contact for the Mass, because during the COVID, we were doing our Saturday Masses out in different places. And one day, we went up to Grasshopper Chapel and did a Mass up there. The Mass is outdoors. The Mass is not in the chapel, just to make that clear. The chapel holds maybe 20 people, but we hopefully will have 150 people out there tonight, or maybe 125, or maybe 75. Who knows for sure? But so outside, bring your chair. Plenty to look at out there. And like I said, we have been given a perfect night. Gracias a Dios. Thanks be to God. It's a part of what do we make of these things? Laura Ingalls Wilder reports that the grasshoppers disappear immediately after construction of the chapels begins. We have a little bit of caution when it comes to stories like this. It could be other causes, but on the flip side, we do see the hand of God in the events surrounding us. And, one of those things we can find out if we want to look up in the encyclopedia in heaven when we get there, what actually happened. Was it the chapel? Was it other prayers? Was it, something changed in the weather? But anyway, we rely on God's providence to lead us through and to bring us through. And we are thankful. We're thankful for these little signs in our world that speak of God's tender care for us. And that is what we will discuss this evening, I think. And we'll sing a few Marian songs. We'll kick out some Marian songs, I think. Haven't talked to Jonathan Walls is going out there, so bringing his guitar, so that'll be a great night. All right. Peace be with you. God bless you. Happy to have you join us. Oh, sorry about the last 2 days. I could not figure out how to do it on my Facebook and how to tape that, so we did not do anything for morning meditation the last few days. And maybe none of you are watching this morning, but anyway, God bless. We'll be back. We'll be back